I'm Julia Bennett, and the day I told my parents I was getting married was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, my mother spat out the words, "You don't deserve to be a wife." And my father just stood there, arms crossed, silent as stone. That's when I knew they weren't just against my wedding, they were planning to ruin it. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I love hearing where these stories reach. Drop your city or country in the comments. I still remember the heat rising in my cheeks as I stepped into my parents' living room that evening. The golden hour sunlight streamed through the window panes, catching the edges of my engagement ring like a tiny explosion of joy. My fingers trembled slightly as I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, mentally rehearsing the moment for the 100th time. This was supposed to be a moment. The moment. My parents, Linda and George Bennett, had always been proud of tradition. And nothing says tradition like coming home to announce you're getting married. I barely had time to place my bag down when my mother shot me a look that made my spine tense. "Well," she said, eyebrows arching over her sharp green eyes. "You look busy. What's this about?" I smiled, nervous but hopeful. "I have news, big news." Dad didn't look up from his recliner. Typical, I pulled the ring into view. "Nathan proposed," I said yes. Silence. Then came the scoff. "You." Linda's voice cracked like a whip through the quiet. "You're getting married." I blinked. "Yes." "To who?" she asked, almost in a laugh. "That detective boy who never takes his shoes off indoors." My smile faltered. "His name is Nathan. And yes, we're getting married this fall. I was hoping we could hold the ceremony here in Charleston. Home." Linda's laugh turned harsh. "Home? This hasn't been your home since you left for college. You think you can just come swanning back here in some engagement glow and play bride?" Dad finally looked up. "Where's he from again?" His tone was bland, like we were talking about car insurance. "Wilmington," I replied cautiously. Linda folded her arms. "So why not get married there? Why drag us into it?" I looked between them, my heart climbing into my throat. "Because you're my parents, because this is where I grew up. I thought it'd mean something." Linda stood abruptly, her voice rising. "You don't deserve to be a wife, Julia. Not with the way you cut us off, made your life all about you. We didn't even know you were dating anyone serious." "I didn't hide anything," I cried, suddenly breathless. "You just never asked." Dad crossed his arms, leaning back as if this whole conversation bored him. "You're making drama out of nothing. Your mother's just surprised, that's all." "No," I whispered. "She's angry." Linda's lips curled. "You're selfish. That's what this is. You come in here expecting applause." No part of me had been prepared for this. Not the sarcasm, not the silence, not the subtle glint of triumph in Linda's eyes like she'd just knocked over a glass castle I'd spent years building. For a second, I thought maybe I'd imagined the cruelty. Maybe I'd heard it wrong. Then she added, quieter but somehow sharper, "Men like Nathan don't stay with women like you. You'll see." That did it. The joy cracked inside me like glass. I stood there, frozen in my own childhood home, surrounded by the very furniture I'd once curled up on after heartbreaks, birthdays, prom, and now I was being stripped of one of the happiest milestones of my life. My breath felt shallow, my fingertips cold. I turned to my father, hoping for what? A word, a gesture. He just looked at me with that maddening calm. "You're not going to say anything?" I asked, my voice tight. He shrugged. "Don't see the point." Just like that, I was 13 again, explaining why I'd failed my math test while he turned up the volume on the TV. I was 16, crying in the kitchen over a breakup while he just grabbed his beer and walked away. But this wasn't teenage drama. This was my future, and they were treating it like an inconvenience. I picked up my purse, my ring heavy on my finger now like it didn't belong there anymore. "I thought you'd be happy for me," I said softly. Linda walked toward the doorway and paused, not turning around. "Some mistakes look like dreams at first. You'll understand that one day." And with that, she left me standing there, the air thick with rejection. I didn't cry, not yet, but something inside me twisted and curled up tight. This wasn't just disapproval. It was sabotage in silk gloves. And I suddenly realized I wasn't fighting for my wedding. I was fighting for my dignity. I don't remember walking out of the house. One minute I was standing in my parents' living room, feeling like a stranger to my own blood. The next, I was out in the cool air, the scent of salt water hitting my lungs like a lifeline. I think I called Nathan somewhere between turning off the porch light and slipping into my car, but I couldn't tell you what I said. Just that he told me to meet him at the harbor, said he'd be waiting, and he was. Leaning against the rail where the ferry boats dock in the evening, his jacket open, arms crossed, looking out over the water like he could see me coming. The minute I stepped onto the boardwalk, I felt the tears threaten. The Charleston harbor always looked so calm in the twilight, blue slipping into gray, the lights across the water blinking to life. And that night it felt like the only place in the city that wouldn't judge me. Nathan turned. "Hey!" Just that one word. I walked right into his arms without thinking, letting the weight of it all crash into him. He held me. No questions, no small talk. Just his arms around my back, his chin resting gently on my temple while I breathed in the scent of his shirt, coffee, cologne, and that something uniquely his. After a while, I pulled back. "She said I don't deserve to be a wife." He didn't blink. "She's wrong." And my dad, he didn't say anything, just sat there like he was watching weather reports. Nathan exhaled. "I'm sorry, Jules. I really thought they'd at least try to fake a smile." I laughed once bitterly. "I should have known better." We walked in silence for a bit, the wooden planks creaking beneath our steps, the breeze tugging at my hair. The weight in my chest hadn't lifted, not completely, but with each step beside Nathan, it shifted. It moved from suffocating to heavy, still hard to carry, but bearable. "They don't want us to get married," I finally said. "Or maybe it's just me they don't want married." Nathan looked out at the water for a long moment before responding. "Do you want to marry me?" The question caught me off guard, not because I doubted the answer, but because it grounded me. I nodded. "Yes, of course." "Then we get married," he said simply, "with or without their blessing." I glanced at him, studying the way his jaw tightened when he was being protective, the way his eyes flickered with quiet rage even though his voice stayed calm. "I was hoping to have the wedding here," I admitted. "Charleston's always been home. I imagine the ceremony under those big oak trees near the marina, jazz music, brunch the next morning in my parents' backyard. I even thought my mom might help with the flowers." Nathan squeezed my hand. "She still might." I gave him a look. "After that, I'm not saying we trust them," he said, stopping to face me. "I'm saying we take the parts of Charleston we love and we leave the rest." His words sank in. "I don't want you to feel like you have to cut out every memory just because they poisoned it," he added. "This is your hometown, your story too. They don't get to rewrite that." He was right. And I hated how right he was. We kept walking. Seagulls squawked overhead and the first stars began pricking the sky. Somewhere nearby, a guitarist strummed a slow, haunting melody that echoed off the water. Nathan tucked a hand in his pocket. "How would you feel about still doing that backyard brunch?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mean, at their house?" "Just an idea," he said carefully. "Might help keep some normalcy, and frankly, it'd be hard for them to sabotage something after the wedding, might even force them to act civil if only for the neighbors." The idea sounded reckless, but also bold. "You're really not scared of my mother," I murmured. Nathan grinned. "She's a hurricane in heels, but she's not the law." I snorted, then wiped under my eye with the back of my hand. "You always make it sound simple." "It's not," he said. "But that's what makes it worth it. We'll plan the wedding here, Jules. You can pick your florist, your trio, your jazz brunch. We'll make it beautiful with or without them." Something softened in me then. A part that had braced for more rejection, more ruin. Instead, I leaned on the rail beside him and let myself imagine again. White tablecloths under the trees, champagne flutes clinking, music weaving between conversations. It was fragile, but it was there. Hope. I turned toward Nathan. "You know what the worst part was?" He looked at me gently. "What?" "I think they were waiting for this moment, waiting for me to come home so they could tear me down again." His jaw tightened. "Then let's give them a better story to tell, one where you rise anyway." And standing there with his arm around me, the sea breathing against the dock, I realized something. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about reclaiming joy on land that had tried to erase it. And I wasn't about to let them win. I always imagined wedding planning would be a whirlwind of champagne toasts, Pinterest boards, and tearful calls with my mom over lace swatches. Instead, I found myself thumbing through a florist's catalog alone in the backseat of my rental car, parked 2 blocks away from my childhood home. because I couldn't bring myself to look at that house 1 minute longer than necessary. But I was doing it. The wedding was happening, and Charleston, for all its ghosts, was still my chosen place. Nathan had taken a few days off for a string of out-of-state depositions, which meant I had to hold down the planning alone. Florals, catering calls, band auditions, table layouts. He texted me every night with encouragement. "Jazz trio sounds perfect. You're doing amazing. Don't forget to eat." I clung to those messages more than I wanted to admit. On Tuesday, I visited Blossom and Pine, a cozy florist tucked into a historic building downtown. The owner, a woman named Darcy with silver hair and combat boots, walked me through her garden-meets-jungle studio. When she asked about colors, I said, "No pastels. I want bold. I want unapologetic." Darcy smiled. "Now that's a bride I want to work with." I left with a mock bouquet of peonies and marigolds, and for a fleeting moment I felt like someone who hadn't been publicly stripped of her joy. But coming home always put that illusion to rest. "Back from playing Bridezilla," my mother quipped from behind a magazine as I stepped into the house. I paused in the doorway. "I'm finalizing vendors," she murmured. "Let's just hope you're not planning too hard. Would be a shame if this whole thing gets called off." My breath caught, but I didn't let her see it. "Why would it get called off?" I asked flatly. She didn't look up. "Men get cold feet, Julia, especially ones who don't know what they're walking into." I set the bouquet on the hall table and walked past her without another word. Dad was no better. During dinner that night, awkward and quiet, as always, I mentioned a jazz trio I was considering for the ceremony. He didn't even look up from his steak. "Isn't that a bit much?" he asked. For a wedding. For a wedding that might not last." It was so subtle, so cutting, and no one else in the room said a word. The next day, I found a band I loved. They played in a tucked-away bar near the college, smooth and effortless, the kind of music that melts tension from your shoulders. I paid their deposit on the spot. I needed that music to fill the silence I'd been drowning in. I also booked the brunch caterer, a local bakery Nathan and I had once stumbled into after a beach trip. When I asked if they could cater in a backyard, they lit up. "We've done dozens," the owner beamed. "Mimosas and mini quiches, right?" "Yes," I said. "Exactly." But every win was met with another cut. Thursday morning, I walked into the kitchen to find Mom flipping through old photo albums. At first, I thought maybe she was softening. Maybe she was reminiscing about my childhood. Maybe she remembered how I used to sketch wedding gowns in the margins of my notebooks. But she didn't even glance up when she said, "Have you thought about what you'll do if Nathan doesn't show up?" It was so casual, so cruel, I sat across from her slowly. "Why would you even say that?" she shrugged. "It's happened before to other women." "Not to me," she smiled. "Not yet." I stood, heart pounding, and took the album from her. Flipping through it, I saw the old photos, me at 7 in a Halloween costume, holding up a handmade sign, "I want to be a bride someday," even then. I'd always known. "Why does this bother you so much?" I asked quietly. "What do you get out of tearing me down?" She looked at me, for once not trying to hide the sharp glint in her eyes. "Because you left, you got out, and now you're coming back acting like we're supposed to celebrate you." I closed the album. "I'm not asking for your celebration," I said. "I'm building my life, whether you're watching or not." Then I picked up my bouquet mock-up and walked out the door again. Every step back to that house felt like walking into a controlled burn, but I kept walking, kept planning, kept believing. This wedding wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming something. And no matter how many sideways glances or venom-laced jokes my mother spat, I was going to walk down that aisle with my head held high. Because for the first time in years, I knew exactly who I was, and they couldn't take that from me. The house was quiet that morning, too quiet. Mom had left for her women's Bible brunch. Dad was probably sulking upstairs in his study, pretending he couldn't hear me prepping for the wedding brunch like I was building a gallows instead of a guest list. I was halfway through ironing table runners when the doorbell rang. I frowned. Nathan wasn't due back until tomorrow, and it was too early for caterers or rental deliveries. When I opened the door, I blinked in disbelief. Danielle. Standing on the porch was a woman I hadn't seen in 5 years. chestnut curls pulled into a loose ponytail, jean jacket, and that same easy smile that used to get us out of trouble in high school. "In the flesh," she said, lifting a bottle of champagne like an offering. "Heard there's a celebration happening, and maybe some sabotage." I laughed, an actual laugh, and pulled her into a hug. Danielle Rivers had been my best friend until college took us in opposite directions. We'd lost touch somewhere between internships, boyfriends, and endless job transfers. But seeing her now, I remembered exactly what comfort felt like. "I can't believe you're here," I said as we walked into the foyer. "Marcy from the florist called me," she said. "I stopped in to pick up a birthday bouquet for my sister, and she mentioned a certain bride-to-be was fighting a quiet war across town." I groaned, closing the door behind her. "Did she say how quiet?" "Just that you were still standing." Danielle looked around the living room, noting the half-decorated dining table and the elegant chaos. "Barely, from the looks of it." I offered her a glass and motioned toward the dining room. "Brunch planning. Nathan's idea. Thought it might force a little civility." She popped the champagne, poured generously, and clinked her glass against mine. "Here's to civil wars and uncivil mothers." We sat on the floor among linen napkins and charger plates, sipping and catching up. "So what happened?" Danielle asked eventually, her voice gentle. "The Julia I knew never let anyone, especially her mom, dim her light." I hesitated, then said, "She told me I didn't deserve to be a wife, that Nathan wouldn't show." Danielle's face darkened. "She said that," I nodded. "In front of my father, he didn't say a word." Danielle leaned back against the wall, swirling the champagne. "I don't understand how you're still under this roof." "Because the wedding's here, and I'm stubborn." "Stubborn doesn't even cover it. You're enduring a siege." I smiled grimly. "It's like they're trying to punish me for being happy, for wanting more than what this house taught me to accept." Danielle studied me for a long moment. "You've always been strong, Julia, but this is different. This is strength with a spine, and they know it." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. We started unpacking the new table decor together. Danielle cracked jokes the entire time. "You're not seriously putting your aunt next to your cousin who sells essential oils on Facebook, right?" "I'm trying to promote family unity," I said. "Girl, no. That's how brunches end, with someone being hit with a mimosa glass." Laughter came easier with her around. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was walking a tightrope barefoot. But peace never lasted long in this house. Halfway through rearranging the cutlery trays, I heard the familiar groan of the stair landing. My father, George Bennett, descended slowly, arms crossed, wearing that look of controlled disapproval he'd perfected over the years. He said nothing as he entered the dining room, simply stood in the doorway watching us work. "Dad, this is Danielle," I said carefully. "She's helping with the brunch." Danielle stood and extended a hand. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Bennett. Julia's talked about you for years." He ignored her hand. "Didn't realize this was a party." "It's not," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Just prep work for the brunch." He glanced at the champagne bottle. "Looks like celebration to me." Danielle smiled politely, unfazed. "Well, you know what they say, celebrating early keeps the storm clouds confused." He said nothing to that, just looked at me with that unreadable stare, then turned and walked back upstairs without a word. When the door clicked shut at the top, I exhaled slowly. "Still emotionally constipated, I see," Danielle muttered. I almost choked on my drink. We laughed again, deep, grateful laughter, and then sat together in the sunlight streaming through the back window, folding napkins and planning seating charts like there wasn't a battle raging just beneath the surface. "Do you regret coming back?" Danielle asked softly as we worked. I thought about it. The venom, the stares, the slow, deliberate unraveling of joy. And then I thought about the ceremony, the vows, the future I was building, no longer from fear but from fire. "No," I said, "because I'm not running anymore. I'm building something they can't burn." Danielle raised her glass again. "Then build it with iron." The morning of the brunch dawned cool and bright, the kind of Carolina weather that tricks you into thinking everything's fresh and full of promise. The tables were set. The jazz trio was scheduled to arrive by 10, and my guest list had confirmed attendance from cousins, neighbors, and a few of Nathan's distant relatives who drove in just for the occasion. What I didn't have. Nathan. He'd gotten called into a last-minute case out of state, a criminal hearing that couldn't be rescheduled. We talked late into the night about it. He hated the timing. I hated the thought of facing all this without him. "You sure you're okay doing it solo?" he asked, voice low and concerned. "Solo but not alone," I said, thinking of Danielle, who was already bringing over peach tarts and mimosa fixings. "You've got a spine of steel," he murmured, "but call me if you need a sword." I smiled, even if it didn't quite reach my chest. Now, standing in the hallway in a pale blue dress that matched the hydrangeas on the table, I forced myself to breathe evenly. The house still carried tension like static. Mom had barely spoken all morning. Dad had muttered something about not being in the way and vanished to the garage. But they hadn't openly sabotaged anything. Not yet. Danielle arrived first, sweeping in with a tray of pastries and an exaggerated wink. Did they turn into stone statues yet, or are they saving the drama for when the champagne's poured? "No statues," I said, "but the air's about as warm as a morgue." She rolled her eyes. "Well then, let's give them a show they'll choke on." We set the brunch in motion. Quiche and croissants, coffee and champagne, little gold-framed name cards I'd written by hand. Guests trickled in, smiling, curious, warm. A few raised eyebrows when they realized Nathan wasn't there, but I smiled through it. "He'll be back tomorrow," I assured them. "This was always about the people who helped us get here." I meant it. Even if some of those people were staring at me from across the room like they were watching a fire they hoped would spread. Linda, my mother, floated around the edges of the party in a navy wrap dress, perfectly pressed. She didn't greet guests. She didn't help refill coffee. She didn't smile. She just observed. George stayed near the back door, arms crossed, sipping sweet tea like it might poison him. He didn't speak to me once, but nodded slightly when a neighbor complimented the table setup. Small wins, or illusions of them. "I don't know how you're holding it together," Danielle whispered as she passed by with a tray. "I think I've crossed over into performance art," I murmured. Guests laughed and clinked glasses. People told stories about Nathan, ones I hadn't even heard. A retired neighbor recalled how Nathan had helped her file a fraud report when someone scammed her out of $600. "He's got this kindness about him," she said. "You can tell it's not for show." I smiled so hard it ached. Someone played a quiet jazz track from the speaker system, and the house, despite everything, briefly felt like joy. But then, of course, came the frost. A family friend approached my mother near the dining table. "Your daughter's done such a lovely job with this brunch. You must be so proud." Linda's lips barely moved. "We'll see if it all holds together." The words weren't meant for me, but I heard them anyway. Danielle stiffened beside me. "You want me to dump a mimosa on her? I'll do it. I've got steady hands." "No," I said. "Let her stay bitter. I've got honey everywhere else." By noon, the brunch was winding down. Plates were picked clean. Laughter had carved itself into corners of the room, and still not one word of praise from either of my parents. But they hadn't disrupted it. That was something, that was. Enough, maybe. When the last guest left and the last champagne flute was rinsed, I sat down in the kitchen, my shoes off, my feet aching. Mom passed behind me wordlessly, dropping a dish towel onto the counter. Her silence clung to the air like mildew. "You know," I said softly, "you could just say it." She didn't stop moving. "Say what?" "That you want me to fail." She paused, then turned. Her voice, when it came, was almost bored. "I want you to realize life isn't a fairy tale. That's not wishing failure. It's preparing you for when the shine wears off." "I'm not 12 anymore," I said. "You don't get to define what real looks like for me." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "And when he leaves you, will it still be real?" I stood. "You don't have to like Nathan. You don't even have to like me. But you will not insult my relationship under this roof again." She blinked at me, caught off guard by the tone. Maybe even by the fact that I didn't back down. "You always were too sensitive," she muttered. "No," I said. "I've just finally stopped apologizing for caring." I left her in the kitchen. Danielle found me on the front porch, the sky just starting to blush gold above the trees. She handed me the last glass of champagne. "You made it through," she said. I looked out over the quiet yard. The brunch was over. No disaster had unfolded, but the chill was still there. "I didn't think I'd feel so empty afterward," I admitted. "Because you're still trying to get warmth from people made of stone." I turned to her. "You know what I saw today?" Danielle continued. You, shining in your element, holding everything together even while they tried to ignore you. That's power, Julia. That's the kind of bride no one forgets. I blinked back the sting in my eyes. Thank you for being here. Always, she said, raising her glass. To choosing your joy even when your family does. The house smelled like smoke. Not fire, not danger. Just the leftover, low-simmer kind, the scent of something precious turned to soot. At first, I thought it was from outside. Maybe a neighbor burning leaves too close to dawn. But when I stepped into the hallway, barefoot and blinking, I knew something was wrong. The scent was stronger near my old bedroom. The door was shut, odd, because I'd left it open the night before. I reached for the handle slowly, that thick, creeping dread already crawling up my throat. When I opened it, I stopped breathing. There in the middle of the room was the garment bag that had held my wedding dress. Or rather, what was left of it. Melted lace. Charred tulle. The fabric curled inward like a fist. The white silk bodice now a crumpled, blackened relic. The entire thing was burned through and through, reduced to ruin right there in the closet I had once hidden birthday gifts and high school secrets in. It didn't make sense. There was no sign of an open flame. No electrical fault. Just destruction, deliberate, controlled, cruel. I knelt. My fingers hovered inches above the wreckage. I couldn't touch it. I couldn't even cry at first. Then I let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob, and it cracked through the quiet like a scream in a cathedral. My knees hit the hardwood. My hands dug into the floor, and I cried, not just for the dress, but for what it represented. The ceremony I had imagined since I was a girl. The symbol of a future I was fighting to protect. My grandmother's brooch had been pinned to the neckline. Gone, gone, gone. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and dialed the only number that mattered. Nathan picked up on the second ring. Julia. His voice was thick with sleep. I could barely get the words out. Nathan, it's gone, the dress, they destroyed it. A pause. What? I woke up and it smelled like smoke. I went into the room and its ashes, burned, all of it, the dress, the brooch. My throat closed. I don't know what to do. He didn't ask how or why or who. He just said, I'm coming home right now. I sat there, holding the phone like it was the only solid thing left in the world, while around me smoke and silence settled into my lungs. I had tried to believe it would stop at words. That the worst my mother would do was whisper doubts into coffee cups. That my father's silence was just cowardice, not cruelty. But this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a comment. This was war, and they'd started it with fire. I hung up the phone slowly, still trembling. Outside the window, the sky was turning pink, the kind of pastel morning that used to mean a fresh start. But all I saw was gray. I stayed there on the floor, knees pressed into the hardwood, dress fragments scattered around me like a funeral pyre. I couldn't even imagine walking downstairs, because now there was no hiding from the truth. Someone in that house had wanted to break me, and they almost did. Nathan pulled into the driveway less than 12 hours after I called. He must have driven through the night. His tie was still on, loosely slung around his neck. His eyes, usually soft when they landed on me, were hard. Not angry. Focused. He didn't knock. He opened the front door like he owned the house, walked straight past my mother sipping coffee in the den, didn't even glance at my father who looked up from the paper with his usual blank expression. He found me upstairs, sitting cross-legged on the floor in my old bedroom. I hadn't moved the dress. I couldn't. Where are they? He asked, already kneeling beside the scorched heap. Downstairs, I said hoarsely, acting like they didn't smell the smoke, like it's just another Tuesday. Nathan reached into his bag and pulled out gloves, a flashlight, and a small evidence pouch. He didn't say I'm sorry. He didn't ask, how are you feeling? He just got to work. With surgeon-like care, he picked up what was left of the zipper, metal melted at the ends, fabric burned but still holding a faint ivory thread. They didn't use an accelerant, he murmured. Too clean, controlled flame, no soot spread. Means it was lit carefully, not tossed into something, probably something like a long match or a candle lighter. He scanned the walls, the rug, the closet door. Why would anyone burn a wedding dress? I whispered. He looked up at me finally, his expression unreadable. Because it was yours. He took a swab from the zipper, sealed it, and labeled the pouch. Zipper's got residue. If they touched it barehanded, we'll find prints. My chest tightened. You think they were that careless? I think people who act out of hatred always underestimate how sloppy they are, he said. "And your mother isn't the clean-up type." His words struck something in me, like lighting a match near a soaked wick. I wrapped my arms around myself. I thought if I just stayed calm, if I just got through the brunch, they'd stop. He gently placed the zipper back onto a clean tray. "People like your parents don't stop, Jules, they escalate." There was no judgment in his tone, just truth. He glanced around the room again. "Where's the garment bag?" I pointed to the closet. It had melted along the side seam, the plastic fused in spots with the remaining tool. He squatted beside it, lifting it slightly with tweezers. "Still some intact fibers. I can send this in too, might show more contact." And then finally he reached for me. His arms were warm, anchoring. I didn't cry. Not again. The grief was still there, but something else was rising with it now. Cold, sharp, and strangely empowering. "I'm going to the precinct," he said into my hair. "I'll run these through the system. If there's a match, we'll have proof. You think we'll find something?" "I think," he said, pulling back, "we already have." He stood, rechecking his evidence pouch, then turned to the door. Halfway down the stairs, I heard my mother's voice drift up. "Going somewhere, officer." Nathan didn't stop. I followed him to the front hall, just close enough to hear his answer. "To do what I do best," he said flatly. "Find the truth." And then the door shut behind him, leaving me alone in the foyer with the low hum of the air conditioner and the faint scent of something scorched still clinging to the air. The dress was gone. The day was ruined. But the lies, they were unraveling now, one thread at a time. For 2 days, the house was cheerful. I woke up the morning after Nathan left for the precinct to the sound of clinking ice and my mother's voice calling. "We're out of mint. Can you check the garden?" Mint. When I stepped into the kitchen, she was standing at the counter, slicing lemons with her favorite paring knife, smiling like she was about to host the neighborhood book club, not the fallout from arson. My wedding dress had just been burned, and she was making lemonade. I didn't ask her about the smoke. I didn't ask why she hadn't come upstairs the night before, why she hadn't asked if I was okay or even pretended to be concerned. Because I knew. They weren't hiding their guilt. They were daring me to say something. Dad set up folding chairs on the lawn that afternoon, invited the Hendersons over and some other neighbors from the cul-de-sac. They drank lemonade and complimented Mom on the landscaping. No one mentioned the smell of burned fabric still faint in the upstairs hallway. I watched from the back steps. Danielle had offered to come by, but I told her no. I needed to see how deep the performance would go. It went deep. My father laughed at some joke I couldn't hear. My mother wore her pearls. They looked like the kind of couple who might get invited to judge a garden show or host a fundraiser. And I sat inside like a ghost in my own story, surrounded by ash and silence. Then came the knock. It was late afternoon. I was rinsing dishes I hadn't eaten off of when I heard it, 3 steady raps on the front door. I opened it to find Nathan back in his investigator blues, sleeves rolled up, a manila folder under one arm. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him. His eyes scanned me quickly, checking for damage, I think, then settled. "Is it them?" I asked. He nodded once. "It's them." My stomach dropped, not from surprise, but from the confirmation that something I hoped, prayed, wasn't true was. "I had the zipper and bag tested at the lab," he said quietly. "There were 2 full prints, 1 partial." He opened the folder. "These 2. He laid down the print reports. "Your mother, your father." The air left my lungs. "And the partial," I whispered. "Too smudged, might have been gloved or wiped after, but these," he tapped the clear matches. "These are solid, there's no question." My legs carried me to the couch, but I barely felt myself sit. "They lit it," I murmured. "They walked into that room and destroyed the one thing I'd protected most. For what? To prove they could." Nathan's jaw tightened. "They weren't trying to prove anything, they were trying to erase it." I looked up. "Erase what?" "You," he said simply. "The version of you that left them behind, that outgrew this house. They can't control you anymore, so they burned the symbol of everything they've already lost." We sat in silence for a moment. "Do they know you know?" I asked. "I didn't tell them, yet I wanted you to decide what happens next." Outside, laughter bubbled from the backyard. Glasses clinked. My mother's voice floated in, pleasant and high-pitched, like a woman who hadn't just committed an act of deliberate, calculated cruelty. And in that moment, I didn't feel grief. I felt rage, clean, cold, focused. "They're in the backyard," I said. drinking lemonade. Like they didn't just light a match and watch my future curl into smoke. Nathan nodded slowly. Then let's interrupt. He stood, folder still in hand. You want to confront them now? He asked. I didn't hesitate. I want to watch them crumble. We didn't storm into the backyard. We planned it quietly, precisely like the truth deserved to be served with care, not chaos. Nathan sat beside me at the kitchen table, the evidence folder open between us. His uniform was crisp, the badge polished to a mirror shine. He'd holstered his recorder already, the red light blinking softly beneath his jacket. Not for theatrics, for protection. We do this by the book, he said, tightening the strap on his watch. I nodded, fingers wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. No yelling, no threats. No retaliation, he confirmed, just facts. I inhaled deeply. The tea was cold now, like everything else in this house. Are you sure? He asked, softer now. We can leave it, just take the prints and walk away. Walk away. I'd considered it, more than once. But if I walked away now, I'd never stop looking over my shoulder, wondering what they'd set fire to next. I need to hear them admit it, I said. Not for closure, for clarity. Nathan nodded once, then stood and adjusted his collar. I stood too, brushing invisible lint from my skirt, my knees stiff but steady. We walked to the back door together. The late afternoon sun cast everything in soft light, too gentle for what was about to happen. My parents were sitting beneath the pergola. My mother, in sunglasses and a linen blouse, sipped her lemonade as if it were wine. My father leaned back with the comfort of a man confident he wouldn't be challenged. Neighbors bustled around the table, refilling drinks, chatting about weather and lawn care. Julia, my mother said, her voice smooth but sharp-edged. Nathan, you're just in time for a toast. No toast, I said quietly. We need a word, alone. A few heads turned. Some pretended not to listen. My father raised an eyebrow. What's this about? Nathan held up the folder. A matter of property damage and truth. The chatter around the table quieted. Someone cleared their throat. My mother's smile froze on her lips. Inside, I said firmly. No one moved at first. Then my father stood, giving a tight nod to the neighbors as he followed us back toward the house. Mom trailed behind, her lemonade glass still in hand. We gathered in the kitchen. Same room where I'd learned to bake. Same floor I'd scrubbed after stomach bugs and spilled syrup. Strange how a room can hold so many memories and still feel completely empty of warmth. Nathan placed the folder on the table and opened it. These are fingerprint reports, he said calmly. Taken from the burned remains of Julia's wedding dress. My mother blinked. Excuse me. We found 2 clear matches, Nathan continued. Yours and George's. For the first time in days, my mother's mask slipped, just a crack, but I saw it. She reached for her glass and set it down with too much force. My father's expression didn't change. I could arrest you both right now, Nathan said evenly. This qualifies as destruction of property at minimum, but Julia wanted to give you one chance to take responsibility, one chance only. I looked between them. Their faces, once so familiar, now seemed like strangers wearing my parents' skin. You burned my dress, I said, the words tasting like ash. The one symbol of a future you couldn't control. My mother opened her mouth, then shut it. My father crossed his arms. Nathan's voice broke the silence. Do you deny it? No one answered. So I stepped forward, laid the report flat on the table between us. Admit what you did, I said. And stay out of my life unless I choose otherwise. That's the offer. One sentence, or we press charges. My mother's hand trembled slightly. My father's eyes narrowed. The silence stretched. I didn't move. I wouldn't move. Because I wasn't the daughter they remembered anymore. I was someone they had underestimated. The silence pressed in like a second skin. Nathan stood steady at my side, but he didn't speak again. He didn't have to. The envelope on the table had already said everything. My mother stared at the fingerprint report like it was written in a foreign language. Her mouth moved, then stopped. Her hand gripped the edge of the counter. Linda, my father finally said, low and sharp, don't say a word. She turned on him, voice rising like a sudden gust. Don't tell me what to do, this is your fault, George. I blinked. For a moment, I wasn't even sure I'd heard her correctly. My fault, he said, scoffing. You're the one who went up there in the middle of the night with a candle and a grudge. Nathan didn't move. just hit the side of his recorder once to confirm it was capturing. You told me she didn't deserve to parade around in that dress like she was better than us, my mother hissed. You said it, and you're the one who couldn't stand seeing her smile. Their words crashed into each other like thunderclaps, resentments that had clearly been waiting to surface. Decades of bitterness spilled out in waves, louder and faster now that the lie had broken. I married you when I could have left this town with someone who treated me like more than an accessory. Oh, please. You chose this life and then punished her for living the one you didn't have the courage to. I stepped back, as if to keep from being burned by the sparks flying between them. And then my mother turned to me, tears in her eyes, not of guilt, but of fury. You think we enjoyed watching you come back here like your royalty, flashing your ring, talking about jazz trios and fancy brunches in our house. It was my house too, I said quietly. It was supposed to be home. My father sneered. You left it behind the minute you got something better. I nodded slowly, letting the full weight of the betrayal settle in my chest like stone. You didn't burn the dress, I said, voice shaking. You burned yourselves. You set fire to whatever was left between us. Nathan closed the folder and tucked it under his arm. I'm not pressing charges, I said. My mother blinked. You're not. But I'm not forgiving you either, I added. Not now, maybe not ever. Nathan's voice cut in then, clear and cold. Here's what happens next. You stay away from Julia. You don't contact her unless she reaches out. If either of you violate that boundary, I will reopen the file and press charges. That's not a threat, it's procedure. They said nothing. It was the first time I'd seen my mother truly speechless. Nathan turned to me. Ready? I nodded. But before I followed him out, I looked at them one last time, my parents, now fully unmasked. I came home hoping to build something, I said. You tried to burn it, but here's the part you didn't plan for. I'm still building, just without you. My father looked away. My mother pressed her lips into a line that trembled ever so slightly. And with that, I walked out, not running, not broken. Just done, the screen door creaked behind us. The sun hit my face, and somewhere deep inside, something unclenched, because I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was myself, and that was worth every flame. We had almost reached the car when I heard her voice break. Julia, wait, please. I turned slowly. My mother was standing just past the porch steps, no longer composed, her pearls askew, her eyes red. Nathan moved to step between us, but I touched his arm lightly. It's okay. She took a few halting steps toward me. I didn't mean to, I didn't think it would go that far. I tilted my head. You lit a match. Tears welled in her eyes. I was angry, but not at you, not just at you. You have to understand. I don't, I said, voice firm. I don't have to understand how you convinced yourself that destroying my wedding dress was justified. I don't have to understand why you stayed silent when I cried in the next room. I don't have to understand anything except the truth. You made a choice. She closed her eyes. I lost myself. No, I said, you showed yourself. Behind her, my father stood rigid by the screen door, arms still crossed like confession might stain him. I told her to stop, he muttered. She didn't listen. I looked directly at him. You watched her do it. You stayed quiet. That's not innocence, Dad. That's cowardice. He swallowed, throat bobbing like he'd never been confronted before. I resented you, he admitted at last. You left. You got out. We poured everything into you, and then you left us behind like we didn't matter. You didn't earn a place in my life just because you raised me, I said. Love isn't a transaction. You don't burn my joy just because you feel forgotten. My mother dropped to sit on the porch step, suddenly looking older, smaller. I thought if I ruined the dress, you might come back down to earth, maybe even call off the wedding. I blinked. You thought burning my future would make me run home. She didn't answer. Nathan stepped forward then, calm but unshakable. We gave you the courtesy of honesty. We're not here to fix your guilt. I looked at her one last time. You lost the right to call me daughter the day you burned what I loved. Her lips trembled. I'm still your mother. No, I said quietly. You're just the woman who gave birth to me. Then I turned, and I didn't look back. The first time I stepped into Belle and Pine Bridal, I hesitated. Not because I wasn't ready to try again, but because I was finally choosing for me, and I wanted to be sure it felt right. It was a boutique tucked inside a repurposed post office, owned by a black woman named Rochelle who had eyes like soft thunderclouds and a laugh that made you feel safe. The place smelled like lavender and polished wood, nothing like home. Danielle came with me. As soon as I told her about the new plan, the dress, the chapel, the ceremony without the poison, she cleared her schedule and showed up with a notebook, lip gloss, and 3 sets of tissues. "You're not walking alone," she said, looping her arm through mine. "Not today, not ever again." I didn't cry when I found the dress. It was sleek, off the shoulder, with buttons down the back and a gentle sweep of fabric that trailed like a sigh. No lace, no veil, just clean lines and quiet power. Rochelle zipped me in and stepped back. Danielle gasped softly. I stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. It wasn't about the dress, it was about the reflection. This woman, the one standing barefoot in sunlight, wrapped in satin and certainty, wasn't the scared daughter who came home hoping for love. She was the bride who survived the fire. "I'll take it," I said. Rochelle beamed. Danielle cried. We held the wedding 2 weeks later at a small historic chapel by the river. It had stained glass and peeling pews and charm in all the right places. The jazz trio played softly as guests filled the room. Nathan waited for me at the altar, his tie slightly crooked, his smile steady. Danielle stood beside me in deep navy, holding my bouquet like it was sacred. My parents came. They sat in the back row, silent, not because they weren't allowed to speak, but because, for once, they had nothing left to say. After the ceremony, they approached. My mother's voice cracked as she whispered, "I'm sorry." I nodded politely, accepted the words, and turned away. Forgiveness is a gift, but so is peace. And that day, I chose peace. A year later, the scent of grilled corn and hickory smoke fills the backyard, and laughter bounces off the fences like music. I'm standing barefoot on the porch steps, watching a dozen little feet chase bubbles across the lawn, while Nathan flips burgers with a spatula in one hand and a toddler clinging to his leg. Danielle is inside, bossing my cousins around in the kitchen like she owns the place. And honestly, she kind of does. She was the first one to sit at our dining table when we moved in. The first one who told me, "This house feels like healing." And it does, every inch of it. White trim, big windows, a lemon tree we planted together in the spring. There are photos on the walls of our wedding, of our friends, of the people who stayed. My parents are not here. They haven't been to this house. They send cards, holiday greetings with stiff signatures and no return address. I keep them in a drawer unopened. I don't hate them, I just don't need them to take up space in my peace. I learned something in that house in Charleston, under all that dust and silence and smoke. Family is not blood. It's who shows up with champagne when your life is on fire. It's who zips you into a dress when you're scared to try again. It's who guards your joy like it's their own. Who believes you deserve love even when the people who raised you don't. Nathan comes over, brushing ash from his fingers. "You okay?" I nod, smiling. "More than okay." He raises an eyebrow, thinking heavy thoughts, just how far we've come. He hands me a grilled peach skewer and kisses my forehead. "We built this, all of it, you and me." And we did, not out of spite, not out of vengeance, but from the ashes of a dress, the silence of a porch, and the strength of a girl who finally said, "Enough." The kids scream with delight as Danielle turns on the sprinkler, and Nathan takes my hand and pulls me into the grass. We dance, badly, carefree, because I'm not her anymore. I'm not waiting for approval. I'm living, and I'm free.